This is Scott Kellogg, Education Director of the Radix Center. Briefly, Scott, what is the Radix Center and what happens here?
The Radix Ecological Sustainability Center is a nonprofit organization based here in the south end of Albany that's creating a demonstration site of sustainable tools and technologies designed to teach urban residents, with a special focus on youth, how to have greater local access and control over essential resources such as food, water, waste management, and energy production.
So, what are people allowed to bring here in their compost?
We accept all manner of plant-based food scraps, so vegetables, fruits, coffee grounds, tea bags, coffee filters. What we prefer not to have is meat and dairy. While those things are compostable, they can be more difficult to compost, so we choose to control the floodgate with that. We do accept also cooked foods such as rice and beans and pasta. What we ask that people not bring us a very large quantity of is of bread products, as they can also be difficult to break down in the composting process.
What should people bring their compost in?
We ask that food scraps either get dumped directly into the collection bin or that they're put in a compostable bag.
What are some of the things you definitely don't want to see in the compost?
Small, individually wrapped items. It's important to remind people that we're not a refrigerator cleaning surface, so if you're taking things, for instance, out of the refrigerator that are individually wrapped, please unwrap them and put them into one larger container. No plastic bags or saran wrap or aluminum foil. Certainly no pet waste either are things that we definitely don't want going into the bin.
What happens to the food scraps once the bin is full?
They're brought inside, and typically they are fed to the chickens and ducks, depending on the time of the year. If the chicken yard is overloaded, we may just put it directly into the compost pile, but typically they get fed to chickens.
So for the compost pile, you have a number of bins back there. Can you explain what happens?
Probably about 90% of the food waste that's brought into the Radix Center is fed to the chickens. There is occasionally a surplus, or if we receive a large amount of one particular item that we know they're not going to be able to eat all of, for instance, a huge box of bananas, especially this time of the year when can have potentially issues with yellow jackets, that will just go into the compost pile where bacteria and worms will break it down and turn it into compost. So you end up with the same finished product, whether it's fed to the chickens or put into the compost pile. They're just different routes to get there.
And how does the Radix Center use the compost?
So primarily being fed to chickens provides foods for them, which is then upcycled into eggs, which then we sell as part of our farm share operation. They then create chicken manure, which is mixed with carbon-based materials that we spread in the chicken yard, such as hay or wood chips. That then is periodically dug out and put into a pile and permitted to age separately for a period of time, typically about 6 months, after which it turns into fertilizer and then is applied to gardens and to fruit trees, which in turn are used to grow vegetables that are then provided through the farm share and the farmers market to residents of the South End community.
What is compost good for?
So many things. A fertilizer, primarily, to provide nutrients for plants, particularly in urban soils, which tend to be degraded and nutrient poor. It's also very good for restoring the health of damaged and degraded soils if they are compacted, if they are deficient in organic matter, if they are either acidic or basic. Compost is pH neutral, so it can neutralize those soils. It's also very good for reducing exposure to toxic metals, particularly lead, which is ubiquitous in urban environments, one by creating a physical barrier to separate people from contaminated soils that may be below, but also by binding with lead, it reduces its biological availability and then makes it less likely to get uptaken into plant tissues or into human bodies.
Why should compost not be included in the landfill?
When organic matter is put into landfills, it's under anaerobic conditions, which fosters the growth of methanogenic bacteria, which break down that organic waste and produce methane, which is 25 times or more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, contributing significantly to climate change and global warming. Really what we want to be doing is intercepting those food scraps, keeping them out of the landfill, not only for purposes of climate change, but also for the fact that they take up a huge amount of space in landfills, shorten the lifetime of landfills, and then create the imperative for the creation of new landfills. We really want to be rethinking how we approach waste altogether and not thinking of our discarded materials as something that goes away, but rather how at any time they're at a point along the cycle, and particularly with organic matter, how that can be returned to the soils and used to grow food again. And really, one characteristic of any culture that has practiced agriculture sustainably for any period of time has been that they have returned their wastes to the soil rather than simply externalizing them. So we want to be intercepting those wastes and turning them into fertilizer to use to grow nutrient-dense food for communities in environmental justice and food justice neighborhoods and cities throughout the country and the world.
How should people collect compost in their kitchen and bring it here?
Personally, I have 2 stainless steel containers that I keep on the kitchen counter that food scraps will go into. During the course of the week, I typically end up freezing a lot of it, especially in the summer months, as there's pressure from fruit flies. So I'm maybe putting it into a compostable bag throughout the week and then putting that in the freezer, keeping it frozen until it's time to get rid of it all at once. And that way, especially when it's as hot as it is in the summer, it isn't completely rotten and filled with fly maggots by the time it arrives. We appreciate that.
How do you want people to put compost in the bin?
Loose is preferable. Second to that, inside a compostable bag. Ideally not any plastic bags. Although if that's the only way you're going to be able to do it, we would prefer that you do that than not at all.